Alright, today we're going to be ranking Incredibox Fempolos templates. Let's see here. F tier, they all suck! Yes, including mine. Alright, let me give you some context here. This is Incredibox, a music-based video game where you have 7 beatboxers, blah 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 blah, yada yada. If you're subscribed to my channel, you probably already know about Incredibox. If you're not subscribed to my channel... Anyways, one of the main gimmicks of Incredibox is that there's only one character, the Polo, a caricature depiction of Incredibox's music artist, Paul Malbury. According to Incredibox, all 20 of the different sounds in each version are not separate characters, but rather copies of this same guy repeated 20 times over, hence why every Polo in Incredibox looks the same. But most Incredibox mod makers don't really take that into account when making polos for their mods. Many mod makers treat the polos in their mods more like separate characters rather than the same one in different outfits, which honestly makes sense. As Incredibox mod making has progressed, mod makers have started giving polos unique names, identities, and even sometimes lore documents describing their personality and backstory. It's a whole different way of treating the game and its characters. However, mod makers still keep this same Paul Malbury polo template for these characters, which, again, makes sense. It would be a whole lot of hassle to make a new face and body for every character in every Incredibox mod, and it would probably end up looking odd and out of place anyways. So, most polos in Incredibox mods have this same face and body, not necessarily as a statement of every character here is the same person, but just because that visual style is how Incredibox works, and there's no reason to get rid of it for most Incredibox mods, even if the polos are being treated as individual characters with their own separate identities. So why, then, would we suddenly make an exception for specifically female characters? So these are fempolos, a term short for female polos or feminine polos. They're often design variations of regular Incredibox polos heavily edited to look more like female or feminine presenting individuals. There's dozens of varieties of them all made by different people, and they've been around in mod making for quite a bit now, but their use was likely popularized more by Neaster here, commonly saying how much he prefers them being used.
I love it when they make female polos that are not just the dude with eyelashes. Giant kudos for having like an actual female polo and not just like the dude with lashes. Fem polos should have like their own coherent face. They shouldn't just be the dude with eyelashes.
Which is rather unfortunate, since Neaster has a tendency to sway public opinions on Incredibox topics, even if a lot of his takes are bad. Regardless, I really do not like the idea of these fempolo templates. I have nothing against putting female characters into Incredibox mods, but as I've said, using a completely different base for polos based on their gender is just such an odd choice, especially in a game where every character inherently has the same look to them. Not to mention, they just look bad. Like, most of these fempolo designs don't effectively capture the art style of Incredibox, and even the ones that I think look decently visually appealing still look so out of place among every other character. Even if we disregard the concept of in-game Incredibox character continuity, making female and male characters so drastically different just doesn't make that much sense. Like, let's be honest, we as human beings, while there are some visual differences between sexes, we don't look all that different. Creating a complete redo of the polo's facial structure for these fempolos is just weird and absurd. And another thing, while I acknowledge it's not everyone's priority while making Incredibox mods, it's worth mentioning that fempolo templates basically lock Incredibox polos into a really strict this is male and this is female categorization, and it really complicates making room for any sort of non-binary or transgender or similar LGBTQ identities for polo characters. It's honestly much better, in my opinion, to just treat the basic polo template as a blank slate for everyone, and use other design elements to convey their gender or identity. Actually, speaking of which, if we aren't using these fempolo templates, how do we go about conveying a polo as being a feminine character? Well, believe it or not, you can actually make a polo look like a female through its character design without giving it complete facial plastic surgery, and instead using techniques that are actually logical and realistic, both in terms of Incredibox and real life. Here's all my design advice that I can give to achieve this. First thing I'd recommend is giving the polo eyelashes. There's a lot of styles you can go for, poking out the front, subtle flares on the sides, pointed, rounded, whatever works for the character design. It's simple and subtle, but honestly, it's probably the #1 thing I can recommend to instantly have a character read more femininely. Just think of any media ever that has non-human or very simplified character designs. Most of the time, the designers will just slap a pair of long eyelashes onto a character to show that this is the female one, because honestly, it works. And another thing I recommend is just giving the polo a feminine outfit. The choices you make while designing a polo's clothes can have a huge impact on how its gender is perceived. Similarly, hair can be a good way to present a polo's gender. Having the hair be longer, fuller, and styled in a more feminine way can have a big impact on how the polo is presented. If you're unfamiliar with how to design or style feminine clothes or hair, first of all, go outside more. And second of all, sites like Pinterest or even just search engine images can be a good place to gather reference. And the last recommendation I'd give, and one that I've not seen much before to be honest, is shaping the polo's eyebrows. In general, females' eyebrows tend to be thinner and more raised upward, so taking your handy razor and accentuating that on the polo can help convey a feminine look. And boom, there we are, our own fem polo that actually fits within Incredibox. I cannot speak for everyone, but I personally think that this polo character using these tips genuinely does look like a female individual without needing to completely change the facial structure of it. So yeah, that's all the tips I can give to effectively make a polo appear as more feminine. If you have any questions or other tips or... Oh, okay. Alright, fine. Technically, yes, giving a polo a large chest can also make it appear more feminine. Just don't overdo it, because that's weird. Also, make sure it actually makes visual sense with the anatomy and the clothes surrounding it. I've seen too many Incredibox designs with some really clunky shaping for these kinds of things. Anyways, for real this time, that's all of my advice for designing your own fem polos. Now, I can't control the Incredibox community, obviously, but I really would love to see this method of making fem polos become more common for Incredibox mods. I really do think that the typical fem polo bases just don't work that well for Incredibox and also carry along some weird implications. And keeping the consistency of the polo template, regardless of polo's gender, just works a lot better for the game's visuals and storytelling. Or just make all your polos TVs with no gender. Boom, problem solved.